Assalamu alaikum and a very good afternoon to all the participants present with us today. Welcome to the webinar on Palestine, an issue out of colonial history, which features informed commentators, writers, and activists on the issues related to Middle Eastern politics. Today, as we gather here, approximately 9,000 Palestinians in Gaza have been killed in Israeli airstrikes, with more than two-thirds of casualties include women, children, and elderly people. 33 journalists have also been killed. It is the 27th day of the conflict, which started with the incursion of Hamas militants in southern Israel and killing of around 1,000 Israelis, including soldiers, police personnel, and civilians, according to the figures cleared for publication at the website of Haaretz. With the relentless bombardment that Israeli Air Force has undertaken as a part of collective punishment doctrine of Israeli government, Gaza has been reduced to rubble, with residential buildings, churches, mosques, and hospitals being targeted. Almost 29,000 buildings in Gaza are damaged, with round about 1.4 million people displaced. The humanitarian situation is appalling, as Gaza has turned from a concentration camp into an open-air death camp with death raining from above. It is the first conflict in the modern times where the US, the Western world, and Western media have justified the cutting off of food, water, medicines, and fuel to an entire city. The disproportionality of Israel's response is not being addressed under the cover that Israel has the right to defend itself. When the international community is demanding ceasefire, the mantra of Israel's self-defense is being repeated ad nauseum by some Western states who are continuing to torpedo any efforts to de-escalate and agree to a ceasefire. There are various themes that will be under consideration during the webinar that is being held today. The sequence we'll follow is that we'll have opening remarks from the Deputy Head of Mission, Embassy of the State of Palestine to Pakistan, following which we'll have a talk on the international law perspective of Israel's occupation. The comments following that will be on expressions of solidarity with the Palestinians and the role of advocacy. After that, we'll have expert comments on the geopolitical perspective and peace accords, following which we'll have an eminent speaker talk about the colonial roots of Palestinian issue. Finally, the closing remarks will focus on how, as conscientious citizens, we have to move forward. Before we start, I would like to emphasize that since we have 5 speakers at the moment, 6 if another speaker joins us, we'll be talking on various facets related to Palestinian issue. Please limit your speaking time to 10 minutes so that we can allot more time to the question and answer session. This webinar is being recorded and its complete video will be posted on our social media pages. We'll be starting off with Dr. Nader al-Turk. He's a deputy head of the mission, Embassy of the State of Palestine to the Islamic Republic of Pakistan. He has been associated with the Palestinian government since 1996. He has completed his PhD in international law and MA in international relations. He will be delivering his opening remarks on the situation in Palestine.
Assalamu alaikum. Thanks for giving me the opportunity to join your Honorable Research Center. And thanks for raising your voice in favor of Palestinian people. I like, before I speak about the current situation in Palestine, to explain few things. First of all, we need to keep this map in mind when we are speaking about Palestine. This is the historical land of Palestine. This is the first plan to establishing Israel's state on the Palestinian land, with the brown one. The green one is, well, according to that, Palestinian territory. This is during the 1937. This is according to divided Palestine to 2 states following the 181 resolution was taken by United Nations General Assembly on 1947. Israelis get, according to this international resolution, 56% of Palestinian historical land and let 33% for the Palestinians. On the other hand, in that time, the Israelis or the Jew or the Zionist was only owned 15% of the land of Palestine in support and facilitation actions by the British occupation to them to get more and more land. And the population of the Jew in that time was not more than 20% of the Palestinian who are live in the historical Palestine at that time. 1948, Israelis, when it is establishing Palestinian land and won the war in 1948, they occupied 78% of the land of Palestine. So in 1967, they occupied the rest of Palestine, which was West Bank and Gaza Strip, to become include East of Jerusalem, which is what I mentioned as the borders before 1967. They occupied 100% of Palestine and part of Egyptian territories, Jordanian territories, Lebanese and Syrian territories. Later on, we got a genius president of the United States of America. He came with a very genius plan named deal with the cemetery, and he gives the Palestinian only 12% of their historical land and gives them for the Jew 88% of the Palestinian land. So please keep this map in your mind all the time, because land of Palestine keep decreasing and the Israelis territories become increasing and eat more and more Palestinians territories. On the other hand, the Israelis believes that according to, until now, Israelis don't have a constitution law, don't have a borders. According to their dream, their plan that the border of Israel need to be in the area between Nile River in Egypt and Forat River. I'm not sure Forat River, they mention which area, or start from Syria, or start from Iraq. What that means is going to be a huge area going to be controlled by them according to their plans. According to that, until now, they didn't mention exact border for their state, which was establishing in 1948 on our Palestinians' homeland, which is our homeland since more than 12,000 years. What we are seeing in Gaza right now, it is a war of revenge. They are trying to get a revenge after what happened in the 7th of the month, when their image as a superpower country damaged, destroyed by a very limited number of Palestinians armed people, got the opportunity to cross the borders, and the Israelis failed and get themselves defended. They are actually keep Gaza since more than 20 years under siege in all the ways, from air, ground, and sea. And they are used, it is the borders there, it is one of the most defended borders in the world. According to that, they are making a collective punishment against all the Palestinians who are living in Gaza. 2.2 million Palestinians live right there. Since the 7th of the month of October until now, Palestinians under attack, 24 hours, 7 days a week. What is happening there? It is crimes against humanity, war crimes, genocide, ethnic cleansing. And all of that happened by full support, green light by the Americans, British, Germans, and silence of the rest of the world, which mean give them the opportunity to kill more and more children, women in Gaza Strip, even in West Bank, in cold blood, when they are sure no one told them to punish them or ask them or make them guilty. What we see actually during this war was really strange. The Israelis was, or the Jew was victim of European countries, victims of Nazi, who was mentioned them as rats, to don't feel guilty when he kill Jewish humans in cold blood. The defense minister of Israel, after that happened in Gaza, and they start to attack Gaza, they are using the same concepts, that Palestinians who are living in Gaza are not human, they are animal human. Only to feel not guilty when he kill more and more children, women, older people, all civilians. He used the technique, the words, the plans of Nazi against the Palestinians. Very strange. Until now, we're getting more than 8,500 shaheed, more than 22,000 injured, 50%, even more, of Gaza buildings, homes, roads, infrastructure damaged and destroyed. And the Western countries mention that under the concept that Israel has the right to defend itself. The question against whom? Against children, women, against walls, buildings. This is question need to be answered by international community, what they are waiting for. What we see in the 7 of the months, actually, this was a result of collect political heroism, because we are involved, our leadership, our people, in negotiation and peace process with the Israelis since 1991. But in that time, during Madrid International Peace Conference, the Prime Minister of Israel, Ishaq Shamir, mentioned that he will negotiate with the Palestinians for 20 years without give them nothing. We are negotiate, we are involved in peace process since more than 32 years, and we get nothing. So the collective political heroism will only, and the criminal Israelis actions, especially the Israeli settlers, Israelis army, against the Palestinian people everywhere, West Bank, all the cities of West Bank, all the villages of West Bank. The settlers, when the Israeli settlers, when they burn fire in Turmis Haya town next to Ramallah, and in Hawara town next to Nablus, and the reaction of the world was only silence. This gives the power to Israelis to keep and increase their crimes against Palestinian humans, Palestinian civilians, and increase the settlements and eat more and more Palestinian lands. Israelis was having in mind a very clear plan that they like to damage Aqsa Masjid, build a Jewish temple over Aqsa Masjid, to change the facts on the ground, which is there since thousands of years, by changing this masjid to become a temple for the Jew, only for the Jew. They have the courage to do that because actually they do similar thing in Al-Haram al-Ibrahimi in Hebron in 1994, when they control about 70% of that mosque and change it from mosque to become a Jewish temple. And many times they're not allowed the Palestinians Muslim to use that masjid for pray or even for raise adhan. When they are succeed in that scenario in 1994, they start planning and very active, increase their propaganda that they have the right to do what they need to do in Aqsa Masjid, to do the same in Aqsa Masjid. That's why the Palestinians armed people address this battle under the name Aqsa Flood. The loss of lives is very sad, a very huge tragedy. And it has become more sad and more huge tragedy when we feel that the international community, especially Americans, British, and German, ignore the blood of children, killing of children, and mention that under right of defense. Right of defense in the international law is very clear. The people under occupation have the full right to use any power between their hands to defend themselves. How becomes this power between the power of occupation, not between the hand of the people under occupation? This question needs answer. We are suffering from double standard. If what happened right now in Gaza and for the whole of Palestine happened in Ukraine as example, what's going to be the reaction of the Americans? They're going to give the Russians as power of occupation the right to do what the Israelis do as power of occupation. They will accept the losses on children, women, and civilians. And is this a huge number when it is Ukrainian citizen, not Palestinian citizen? All of us are brothers and sisters in humanity. All of us are son and daughter, grandsons and daughter of Adam and Eve. According to that, the human rights, the national law, the national humanitarian law is created, not created for selected nations, was created for all the human beings to be sure that all humans going to be enjoy security, peaceful life. Israelis have in their mind a huge plan, according to what's published in international media and was shared in the social media. First step, transfer Palestinian people who are living north of Gaza to the south of Gaza Strip, near to the borders of Egypt. Second step, transfer the whole people of Gaza from Gaza Strip to Egypt to become refugees for the second time in their lives since 1948. The third step, damage Gaza completely by non-clear bombings, tactical one with bombs of Jadam, which is American bombs. Which means the Palestinians who are living in Gaza, if they accept under pressure to leave Gaza and transfer from Gaza by force, occupation force, war and power, that means they will not have the right of return again for the second time in their lives. if all this developed plan succeed, they are going for the next step, which is damage Aqsa Masjid, build a Jewish temple in that place, holy place. And after that, who knows, maybe they're going to transfer the Palestinians who are living in West Bank to other countries to get their fake lies and before establishing their own state on the Palestinian homeland in 1948, when there was mentioned that Palestine, it is a land without people for a people without land, which means they're going to transfer all the Palestinians to get Palestine empty from the Palestinian to replace all the Palestinian with Zionist settlers. And who knows what's going to be next. We was blessed as a Palestinian to be the first circle to defend Aqsa Masjid on behalf of Muslim Ummah. And we are strong by the support of Muslim Ummah to us and for our beliefs in Allah. If we are surrender, if we are give up, that will give the opportunity for the Zionists to complete their plan by occupying more and more territories, lands from the neighbors countries around us, according to their plan to have their own state from the Nile to Furat, which means the great Israel going to be created on the ground. So our battle, not only for Palestine, is on behalf of all the people, all the nations, Arab nations, and on behalf of Muslim Ummah. So your support is needed to end this misery, this crimes against humanity, to end the occupation, end the suffering of the Palestinians, facilitate the establishment of Palestinian independent state with Jerusalem as its capital, and facilitate the right of return for the Palestinian refugees to their own homes and territories according to 194 resolution. This is the only way to give hope that peace can be created and can be reached, can be achieved, and war going to be end. Israelis get a donation or from the Americans about 3 billion for military issues with that since long years. With that, they still not feel secure. So maybe peace make all the nations in the region, all the people in the region feel peace and secure. What we are waiting for is giving the people a hope that peace can be reached. Suffering, crisis, circle of blood, circle of violence, which is created by the Israelis day by day against the Palestinian, going to be end once forever. But that we all need to work with it and cooperate to reach it soon as possible we can. So we need to raise our voice together in favor of Palestine, in favor of humanity, by end occupation, end the double standard, and end that there is any nation or any country above the international law. All the nations, all the countries need to follow and accept and obey international law, human rights principles. One thing in the end I like to highlight it, that the protest of people around the world, Muslim Ummah countries, European countries, even the United States of America, even the Latin America, was really give us the power, the feeling to feel that we are not alone. Our brothers and sisters in humanity are with us. Our brothers and sisters, Muslim Ummah, are with us. But sad that the people of Western countries are in the street in favor of Palestine. On the other hand, their own governments are against Palestine and supporting the power of occupation, supporting the crimes, the war crimes, and the crimes against humanity. When Mr. Biden visit Israel to give show solidarity and support for the Israelis, he mentioned that he came as an old Zionist. When Mr. Blinken, the foreign minister of the United States of America, came to Israelis, he mentioned that he didn't came as a foreign minister of the United States of America, but came as a Jew. Maybe he get an answer from His Excellency President of Egypt when he's told him that Jew never suffered in Egypt, Arab countries, Muslim countries, the only was suffering in European countries, especially in Spain. Then Mr. Blinken mentioned that he came as a human being. When the American sent two of their airplane carriers to the area to be sure that Israel will defend it and no one going to attack it from any country or any group in the region. British do the same, send many of their worshippers to be next to Israelis to support them. When we compare this power, this support, the question which we need to ask is the support which are of solidarity for Palestine equal to what the Israeli support achieved from some of the Western countries? Thank you for your time, and I wish all Pakistani brothers and sisters follow the vision and principles of Qa'id A'zam, may Allah bless his soul, in favor of Palestine. Palestine Zindabad, Pakistan Zindabad. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Dr. Nader Turk. Next up, we have Ms. Ayesha Malik. She is the Deputy Director of the Research Society of International Law based in Lahore. Her topic for today's webinar is legal implications of Israeli settlements and obligations of relevant parties in ensuring the protection of civilian Palestinians. Please make sure that the comments on this topic are concluded in the next 10 to 15 minutes at most. As for the audience, we would only be taking questions that are put in the chat box. Please put a short introduction of yourself and a brief question. The Q&A session will be in the end when all the speakers will conclude. Over to you, Ms. Ayesha Malik.
Hello, Assalamu alaikum, everyone. And thank you to CSCR for organizing such an important webinar on this issue. And thank you to His Excellency from Palestine for setting the stage for our debate. And I just want to express my deep, heartfelt solidarity with the Palestinian people for what they've been going through since the Nakba of 1948. So in terms of the international law implications, I want to start from really the basics of international law, where we're looking at the classification of this conflict. And I kind of want to go on from there to talk about the war crimes and to talk about accountability, because it is so incredibly important that we have this situation in which the International Criminal Court does have jurisdiction. It is a rare case where we have that. We have finally seen the prosecutor go to Cairo and make a statement on the fact that war crimes are being committed. So as in, he referred to the possibility of war crimes being committed, which is very different from his statement relating to Ukraine when Russia invaded. So going back to talk about the classification of the conflict, we are hearing a lot from Israeli war lawyers about the reoccupation of Gaza in terms of should the IDF be reoccupying Gaza. Now, they argue that since 2005, Israel has disengaged from the Gaza Strip. There is no troop presence in the Gaza Strip. Now, in terms of an occupation, you don't actually require there to be troops present in the Gaza Strip for Israel to be an occupying power, in the sense that it still has effective control. Gaza has been under blockade from 2007, from Operation Cast led in 2007. And so we have seen a 16-year occupation of that territory. We have seen from the fact that Israel controls everything that is able to come in, go out. It controls the water, it controls the fuel, it controls all of that. And that has been accepted by the Israeli High Court in the Al-Bastioni judgment, where they held that the IDF actually has the duty to ensure that this is being provided to the civilian population. So in terms of classifying the conflict, we have an occupation, and we've had an occupation since 1967. And that did not end with Israeli disengagement in 2005. So in terms of occupied territory, we argue that that occupation is unlawful. And the mere fact of there being an occupation means that Israel does not have the right to self-defense. We keep on hearing from states that Israel has the right of self-defense to defend itself from the Hamas attacks of October 7th. The fact is, you do not possess that right in territory that you yourself occupy. And in fact, it is the Palestinians which have the right to self-defense, because the occupation constitutes an ongoing armed attack. So the Palestinians have the right to self-defense because there is occupied territory, and Israel does not have the right to self-defense in occupied territory. We had the International Court of Justice rule on this in the 2004 advisory opinion. I will take some time to talk about the advisory opinion and the coming one, which is incredibly important. And so when it comes to the war crimes, we have seen starvation being used as a method of warfare. We are now seeing aid going in, potentially as the result of negotiations over hostages taken by Hamas. It is necessary, though, to see, in terms of proof of starvation being used as a method of warfare, we have seen statements from the defense minister, and also from Daniel Hagari, relating to what they have made comments relating to the fact that we won't allow a drop of water to get in for our enemies. We're not going to give them any batteries, any power. So in terms of the aid that is being allowed in, and whether that affects the classification of this being starvation as a method of warfare, we have to look at whether it adequately supplies the Palestinian population. Currently, the UN has said that only 2% of the aid that is required is being allowed in. And we have to look at whether the resources there are necessary to access those allowed in. So if you're allowing in water pumps, but there is no electricity with which to use the water pumps, that does not affect the classification of that as a war crime, which is starvation as a method of warfare. The other war crime being committed by Israel, in which they have also committed in 2007, is that of collective punishment of the civilian population for the actions of Hamas. And we have a court case of this in the Special Court for Sierra Leone called the RUF case, where it was held that there was unlawful killings for those believed to collaborate or be supporters of a particular faction. That was in the Sierra Leonean civil war, and we're seeing that being replayed in Israel-Palestine now in the current Operation of Swords of Iron, which was also conducted in Operation Cast-led in 2007. And so, in terms of the war, that is in and of itself a war crime. It is one that the ICC does not have jurisdiction over, very interestingly, because at the time of negotiations of the Rome Statute, there were states which were involved in an occupation or an annexation which did not want that included in the Rome Statute. We do not know which states they were, but I think that we can make some assumptions on that basis. In terms of the other war crimes being committed, we have seen an incessant and indiscriminate bombardment of the Gaza Strip. We have seen refugee camps being targeted. Now, the Israelis, as they always do, argue that Hamas is there. Hamas is present in these apartment buildings. Hamas is in these refugee camps. The question is, if we still classify that as a military target, we would still need to abide by the law of proportionality, the principle of proportionality, which says that the incidental loss of civilian life cannot be excessive to the concrete and direct military advantage being sought. And the question is whether one Hamas commander in a refugee camp is sufficient to take out the entire civilian population of that refugee camp. And when we're looking at what is happening in Gaza, in the Gaza Strip, in terms of disproportionate action, it is definitely reaching that threshold of there being no military advantage which could justify the rubble of Gaza, the turning it into ruins. And we are seeing that genocidal intent as a manifestation in these statements. We've seen members of the Knesset argue that we're going to give them a Nakba, the like of which they've never seen before. We're seeing statements by Daniel Hagari saying that the focus is going to be on damage, it's not going to be on accuracy. The hardest thing to prove in terms of genocide is a special intent to commit genocide. And we have had statements like that. We've already seen that. We have international lawyers now calling, we have the UN now saying this shows genocidal intent. And also in conducting a forcible displacement, we have seen, because I've been reading so much from the Israeli war lawyer side on this, that the forcible displacement was a humanitarian action in that Israel is ordering civilians to evacuate, to protect them. Well, not really when you have an open air prison and they don't really have anywhere to go, and you have bombed the food trucks coming in from the Egyptian side. So it cannot really be justified on the basis of military necessity, which is what it would have to be. And it cannot be justified also on the basis of a humanitarian crisis, because the party to the conflict ordering the evacuation has contributed to the humanitarian crisis. So again, that is another war crime. And when we're looking at the terminology being used in this, I keep on seeing the phrase coming up of innocent civilians. There is no such thing as an innocent and a not innocent civilian. There are civilians, and then there are those who are members of the armed group, which is Hamas, which can be targeted so long as they're complying with a continuous combat function, or they are directly participating in hostilities. So even when we're talking about whether settlers are civilians or not, we shouldn't be talking in that language until we have, until we know that they're directly participating in hostilities. So those which support Hamas politically, it does not matter. They're civilians and they deserve the protection of international humanitarian law. Also, as long as they're settlers who are not directly participating in hostilities, they are also civilians. So I just wanted to clear that up in terms of the language that we use and how important it is legally. And finally, the point I wanted to make is about accountability. We have the ICC having jurisdiction. It has massively dragged its feet in terms of Palestine. We saw that immediately after, within 24 hours of the Ukraine invasion, the ICC prosecutor, Karim, he made a statement. We saw a huge 45-man forensic team being set up with support staff, with legal staff for Russia's invasion of Ukraine. We saw states pledging funding to set up that team. On the other hand, we've had an ongoing investigation since the pretrial chamber ruled that Palestine satisfied the jurisdictional requirements in 2021. We have finally had a statement by the ICC prosecutor, who finally managed to make his way to Cairo to make a statement. And at the same time, he keeps on complaining that we don't have resources, we are understaffed, we are undermanned team. We didn't even have a legal team until I set one up. There was not one in 2021 when we had an ongoing investigation. So we're seeing a huge change in priorities comparing Ukraine to Palestine. And we really need to ensure that the ICC also exercises its jurisdiction, which extends to what's happening in Israel. It will cover Hamas. It will also cover Israel's actions currently in Gaza. And this is an investigation which was opened in 2014. So the ICC has jurisdiction from 2014 to the present day. Whether we're going to see an IDF member or anyone in the docket in a similar way to we saw arrest warrants being published for Putin is highly unlikely, given US and Israeli resistance to that ICC jurisdiction. But it is something that we have to push for, in the sense that even those living in Gaza currently, they should be posting their videos, any kind of statements that they can find. They have to publish those on the ICC's website so that it can be included as evidence, especially when we're hearing reports that Israel is using white phosphorus, which it has already used in 2007. So any videos of that, we should be urging Palestinians to upload those. We have seen a conviction on the basis of evidence being purely from social media in the Libyan context to produce an arrest warrant. So there is precedent for that and how important that is. Secondly, the push for accountability really has to be universal jurisdiction as well, which means that every court everywhere in the world has jurisdiction over war crimes. So when you have IDF commanders, when you have leading members of the Israeli government traveling to other countries, especially we have seen this being used by Belgium and Syria and Germany in the context of Syrian war criminals, they should really take the lead on that. 1,000 trials even before this have been filed in courts around the world against IDF commanders. So that is really the push we need to see for accountability. And lastly, because sorry, I know that I'm probably going over time, we have had an advisory opinion being given by the International Court of Justice on the construction of the wall in occupied Palestinian territories. And that was an incredibly, incredibly important moment for the Palestinian cause, because there was confirmation that there was an occupation. There was a confirmation that the wall itself constituted a de facto annexation of occupied territory, and that it impeded the Palestinians' right to self-determination, as well as their human rights, including the freedom of movement. Now, 20 years later, in what is a sad indictment of the fact that the international community largely ignored that ruling, and so did Israel, and nothing was done in terms of dismantling that wall and not recognizing the Israeli unlawful situation that it had created in the occupied Palestinian territories, we have another advisory opinion being filed before the ICJ. This advisory opinion has been sent there by the General Assembly on the basis that the Commission of Inquiry set up by the Human Rights Council pushed for this advisory opinion on whether there is an apartheid regime in Israel and whether its prolonged occupation violates the rights of Palestinians. This is a very, very broad question that the court now has to answer, and it will probably give its ruling either next year or the year after. It is very slow to give these rulings. The public hearings are occurring in February. This is very important in terms of a legal and moral victory for Palestinians. Israel is heavy. I keep on seeing statements about how international law doesn't matter. This conflict proves that international law doesn't matter. If it didn't matter, Israel would not be lobbying countries so hard to oppose the General Assembly resolution and also to oppose the ICJ having jurisdiction on what it calls a very political issue. The Palestinians have constantly appealed to the international community, not for pity, but for a sense of justice. And that is what we hope that international law and these illegal forms can in some way provide them. Of course, in a situation like this, where we are just seeing Israel committing war crimes, possibly committing genocide against the Palestinians, this is, a short straw of victory. But in terms of international law, there are a lot of things currently happening which can be a conduit for that sense of justice. So I'll leave it there for the other participants to give their comments.
Thank you, Ms. Ayesha Malik. Some of your observations included the ample violations of international humanitarian law that Israel has committed. You talked about the genocidal statements as intent that perhaps can be proven in the court of law. You rightly pointed out that how this current situation is being compared with the Ukraine, and it covers Hamas and Israel both. But quite sadly, you said that it's highly unlikely that IDF members will be prosecuted. Next up, we have Dr. Mukesh Kapila. Dr. Kapila has extensive experience in global and public health, international development, humanitarian affairs, conflict and security issues, human rights and diplomacy, and with substantive leadership roles in government, the United Nations system and multilateral agencies, the International Red Cross and Red Crescent, civil society and academia. He's also an author and a public speaker. His topic is the role of advocacy and solidarity movements.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me and to this very timely seminar. We've just had some two extremely illuminating presentations giving us the facts and figures as well as a sense of the terrible tragedy that is unfolding in the region. Now, I'm supposed to talk about advocacy and solidarity, but before I go into that, maybe a few remarks on the role of the Palestinian diaspora. I think that was the original part of the role given to me as well. Now, I think, as you know, Palestinians are scattered all over the world. And they have, and I've met with many of them in many countries. And one thing is very clear, that the dispossession and dislocation they have experienced over generations has a profound effect on their psyche and on their contribution to potential future state building. And the problem is that while there is gradual dawning of the awareness of the injustices that Palestinians are suffering, and this is evident in the demonstrations that you're seeing all over the world, everywhere. Do these expressions of solidarity, do they actually make a difference? Do they actually have impact? And much as we would like to see solidarity movements, including diaspora voices, make a difference, the realities are much more unfavorable for a number of reasons. Firstly, this is not about humanity. This is about geopolitics and security issues. So even though we've just heard that what Israel is doing is illegal, apart from it being obviously inhumane, the political security calculations of powerful member states indicate that those considerations don't really apply when it comes to those kind of geopolitical security considerations. And this is because of the overriding concern in countries about their own safety and security. So we have seen, for example, in France, solidarity marches have been banned. And then, of course, the law got involved, and they were told that you couldn't ban marches. People have the right to express themselves, and the right of association, and the right to demonstrate. But it took the executive prohibited those marches, and it required the legal authorities to actually reiterate the rights that people have. But the reasons given is that they're concerned about insecurity in the countries where solidarity marches are taking place, and that is certainly true. We've had quite a lot of terror incidents in a number of Western countries, and in the Western mind, at least, and not just in the Western mind, but also in the Arab mind, there is a confusion between the legitimate cause of Palestine and Palestinians and the use of terror and violence to pursue those objectives. So, in my opinion, of course, Hamas taking hostages in Israel was an own goal. And you saw that in the solidarity that has happened around the world. And whether or not Hamas did that in a calculated way to actually provoke an extreme Israeli reaction, which is what we're seeing now, and thereby get greater greater support for the Palestinian cause, I can't say. But certainly the conspiracy theorists would actually say that this is a kind of a plot in that direction. Be it what it may, there is no question that Palestinians and residents of Gaza are suffering abominably, and we can do nothing other than to condemn that. But in my view, I think solidarity movements in relation to the Palestinian cause would have much greater impact if they did a number of things. First, I think we need some common messages. If you just see the media coverage of marches taking place in many, many countries around the world. I was in Turkey recently, and I was observing what was going on there, and obviously in France, in Switzerland, in UK, where I travel around these places and elsewhere. While the headline slogans are the same, the messages are not very clear. And I think Palestinians must not overestimate the extent of understanding and knowledge that ordinary people have in countries around the world. Not just ordinary people. In fact, the politicians in these countries also have very superficial sense of history as to what has brought us to where we are now. So I think an important objective for the Palestinian voice is to find some clear messages and to communicate them at all levels globally. That would be one thing, rather than just slogans. Slogans only go so far. Important as they might be on the street and photogenic they might be on television cameras and such like, they're not sufficient. They're not sufficient. The second thing that the solidarity movements around Palestine need to do is to come together in solidarity with other injustices around the world. Now, I've been dealing with other human rights abusive situations in many, many other places. In Sudan, where I was a UN coordinator, we've had genocide against Darfur. In Ethiopia, we've had genocide against the Tigrayans. In China, we have the oppression and what has also been judged as genocide against the Uyghurs. We have the Rohingya sitting in Bangladesh, where they're not wanted. And in Myanmar, there's a there's a case in front of the International Court of Justice about Myanmar. My advice would be that a solidarity amongst the different types of solidarity movements, if I can put it that way, would be very good. So we see the just Palestinian cause as part of a spectrum of injustices that prevail in the current geopolitical order. And the more these solidarity movements come together, the more they find common cause, the more they look at the legal and moral inequities as shared, the more I think the case for change and effectiveness of the change is likely. At the moment, unfortunately, what is happening is that today Palestine is in the headlines, and there's a lot of energy and activity around that. But only a few weeks ago, it was Ukraine. And many other examples like that you can think of. So that's quite important. Now, what that also means is that solidarity movements should not be foolish enough to be divided and ruled. I mean, I get so many messages telling me, why am I now so preoccupied with what's going on in Palestine that I'm not saying very much about some of the other causes that I have been passionate about only a few days ago. And I'm asked, have I forgotten them? Have I moved on? And this illustrates a dilemma solidarity faces, and that is our human capacity as to how much can we hold in our hearts and heads at the same time. And as I responded to these other people who were sadly communicating with me and saying, hey, have I forgotten their cause? Now this cause is more important than their cause, but their suffering is still there. And you've moved on to another people's suffering. Whose suffering is more important? And this trick of my suffering being more important than your suffering, or the other way around, is another part of the divide and rule approach that those who are not opposed, those who are opposed to bringing about some real change in the situations of inhumanities and injustices we see around the world, they use that tactic. And unfortunately, solidarity movements who are so single-minded, understandably so, they fall into that particular trap. I would say that we are not going to see progress in Palestine unless we see also progress in other situations of inequity, injustice, and illegality around the world. It's not an either or. So I think the pain of Palestine, and that I think no one can dispute, even the Zionists, cannot be the pain is not worth it. It will not have served a useful purpose unless we can use it to also transform the world that we are in. So now this is not necessarily a great deal of comfort to those who are suffering at this acute moment with bombs falling on their head, who are starving. And I'm just totally shocked by the proportion of children who have been killed in Gaza. I never come across that in other situations where I spent, I don't know how many decades in war zones. But it is extremely important that solidarity movements take a calm, calculated, furious approach to this. By furious, I mean being angry and passionate, but at the same time, being smart about it. And for that, we need more leadership in the solidarity movements. Inchoate, random, scattered demonstrations of solidarity around the world may create the illusion of a worldwide movement. And undoubtedly, decent millions, tens of millions of people around the world feel for the injustices and the inequities of the Palestinian cause. There's no question about that. But that's not going to work on its own, because the way the power structures work, as I was saying earlier on, they're used to this. So today, somebody's demonstrating in London and Palestine, yesterday in Paris, somewhere else, and maybe one day we will have a week of these movements everywhere in the world. Fine, all that is good and important for raising the cause. But I would argue that the solidarity movements need to get smarter. They need to find coherent messages. They need stronger leadership. Ideally, that should be led by Palestinian voices, because the voices of those who suffer most and those who have the greatest stake in it obviously have more credibility and authority. And we've seen that, for example, with the Yazidi voices leading in terms of advocacy for their cause. And I think they've been reasonably effective. So the question then it becomes, we are back to the diaspora. The role of the Palestinian diaspora in global solidarity for the Palestinian cause. We know that most of the Palestinian diaspora is within Arab nations. Unfortunately, Arab nations have an ambivalent relationship with Palestinians. They support the Palestinians, they share a faith, the Muslim faith, but that's not enough. We also know that the same Arab states are also strong allies and dependent on the security assistance of Western governments who have taken such a cynical approach towards the whole Palestine-Israel issue, which was brilliantly expressed in our first presentation. So I think we need to look at the political, geopolitical, and security realities. And the world is divided, but a divided world also has, unfortunately, the negative impact of dividing the solidarity movements. So our heart goes out to the people. And this is not about law. I mean, I think the legal talk we had was brilliant and I think necessary. But when we reduce the inhumanities that we are going on to the abstruse arguments of whether this is genocide or not genocide, or whether this is a war crime or a crime against humanity, then we have lost the plot. Because you only have to look at the evidence. Labeling something as a war crime or a crime against humanity or even genocide doesn't solve the problem. What it does is it just thinks that you can find legal solutions to these issues. And one thing we have learned from the Palestine's tortured history is that legality is not going to solve this particular problem, because the world is not in a legal mood. Let me finish there. This is not intended to be to depress everyone. On the contrary, this is to actually bolster the resolve to get smarter when we take on solidarity with the Palestinians, and to do it in such a way that actually we transform the world with it. A transformed world is what is going to give us a just solution to the Palestinian question, not the other way around. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Mukesh Kapila. Very instructive comments from your side. You talked about how the solidarity movements need to get smarter, about common messaging and clear messaging that goes on all levels, and how the solidarity movements have to connect with other injustices that are happening around the world, and the importance of leadership as well. Now we have Mr. Umer Karim. Mr. Umer Karim is pursuing his PhD from the University of Birmingham. He's an associate fellow with the King Faisal Center for Research in Islamic Studies, and his expertise is on Middle Eastern politics. For today's event, his topic is, should the Oslo Accords take precedence over the Abraham Accords? Over to you, Mr. Makri.
Thank you so much for inviting me, and thanks to CSCR for giving me the platform to speak. And first and foremost, my personal solidarity with the Palestinian brothers. I have very close friends who are right now in Gaza. Their families are in Gaza, and it's every day. It's something very personal, because every day when I get up, I message them, and somehow in the Western world, there is no understanding that there are alive human beings, human souls, which are present there in this virtual war zone, and which are being daily mass murdered by the occupation army of Israel. So we pray for all of them, and may Allah give them more courage to stand in front of this calamity. So as suggested, my conversation here is about more about how regional politics has progressed since the Oslo Accords, and how we eventually reached to the Abrahamic Accords, the so-called Abrahamic Accords. So I'll start by saying that the Oslo Accords, they themselves had a lot of lacunas within them. They stopped short of fully acknowledging a Palestinian state, and although there was recognition by Israel of Palestinian Authority and by the Palestinian Authority of Israel, there was this shortcoming there, that the idea of a Palestinian state was there, but it wasn't really as itself on the paper. And with the assassination of Israeli Prime Minister Rabin, I think the Oslo Accords um, reached their penultimate end. Regarding the Arab factor or the regional factor in this cause, I would suggest that once initially, of course, Egypt and then afterwards Jordan, once they normalized the relationship with Israel, and of course Syria was weakened, the Arab involvement or the Arab factor or the regional Arab factor basically was neutralized, and the cause was very much left with the Palestinians. And that's the sad reality, that politically the burden has to be the cause has to be taken forward by the Palestinians, and for the Arabs, they had their own political priorities. And the next step, which was an important one, which came in this regard, was the 2002 King Abdullah Peace Initiative. In this peace initiative, Abdullah of Saudi Arabia, at that time, I reckon he was the crown prince. He presented this idea that Israel should accept an independent Palestinian state, and once this political settlement has happened, then the Arab world and the broader Muslim world will normalize relationship with Israel. So that was, you can say, the most comprehensive political proposal or a political plan which came from the Arab Gulf side, and particularly Saudi Arabia. But as we see, Israel, of course, it didn't reciprocate in any way. And what I have seen over the years, and this is, some people say that there is differentiation between Likud and Labor and different Israeli political factions in this regard. But I see this a constant, you can say, constant fixture of Israeli politics, that because of the overwhelming support, and that is critical, of the United States, their overwhelming defense patronage of Israel, economic patronage of Israel, I guess Israeli political elites, they have an idea that they can just go on and on and on, and eventually the Palestinian cause or the impracticality of this cause will become a fait accompli, and those who are still not normalizing with us, they will eventually normalize relationship with us, and we will keep building settlements in the West Bank. We will keep Gaza as an open air prison, and whenever we want, we will bomb cities and towns of Palestinians. And this sort of a modus operandi can just be continued for as long as we want. And some people associate this with Prime Minister Netanyahu, the current Israeli Prime Minister. But I think that this is an idea which is shared widely within the Israeli political spectrum. With regards to the Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu, he has told a lot of people that, or what he touts his biggest political success, as his biggest political success is that he has given nothing in engagement, in negotiations to the Palestinians, and he is doing all he wants. He is going on with settlements. He is going on with the normalization with Arab states, specifically in the Abrahamic Accords. So basically, it's a take all and give nothing model. And I guess that within the Arab Gulf, we have certain societal dynamics that have also played a role. The emergence or the prominence of a new generation within the Gulf societies that has grown up watching these Israeli propaganda television shows, and the very idea which is prevalent within this new generation of the impression of Israel being a technological giant, and it's the aura or the image of its modernization. I think that this, alongside the relatively lesser emotional attachment of this new generation, particularly in the Arab Gulf states, with the Palestinian cause, did create a dent for the cause within these states. And because this generation then eventually landed into the power corridors of some of these countries. So, and also within, you can see amongst the rulers partnership or engagement with Israel, because it is technologically very advanced. It's IT firms, software firms. They can also help these states in their own tech and industrial modernization, but also can help the ruling regimes in terms of greater and effective policing of their citizens. So Israel again emerged for the power quarters as a productive partner, or as a partner which should be engaged with. And I guess that the very idea of Abrahamic Accords also included in addition to all of this, to score some vital brownie points with whatever administration is in DC and different political factions within the DC. And I guess that this was an idea specifically which motivated at least one particular country in its, and in addition to it being able to get advanced state-of-the-art weapon systems, which eventually didn't. But it did get a lot of political mileage within DC, which was very helpful in deflecting some of the criticisms which are coming in its way, owing to its engagement with China and Russia, and not cooperating with US on certain other issues, particularly Ukraine. And for some other countries, it was about financial resources, or the possibility of getting rid of their debts. So it was, in a way, a multi-package. But we have to say that one state within this assortment of states that eventually turned the Abrahamic Accords was leading the way and was instrumental in pushing forward this new political reality. So this is where we stood before the 7th of October. And what did actually 7th of October change? So 7th of October, and I said this as a quote to a prominent publication, that the 7th of October shattered and the image of Israeli invincibility and of its might. It basically humiliated the Israeli war machine big time. the very psychological dimension of 7th of October, you cannot really comprehend it. And so the constituency, which always viewed Israel as so, and its war machine, its state, its intelligence agencies, as sort of invincible creatures, that image was gone, completely gone. And that constituency, which was really impressed from it, it suddenly found out that they are they are completely fallible, and the idea that this big war machine collapsed in front of a ragtag militia force even further cemented the idea of Israeli failure, and that you cannot really depend upon such a on this war machine as a partner, because it failed in front of just a ragtag group of armed fighters. I think psychologically, as much as it had impact within Israel, it also had a lot of impact within the Arab Gulf world. And the second impact, and of course, then the reaction of Israelis, the very instrumentalization of the approach of a collective punishment being imposed on the people in Gaza, but also the people in West Bank, motivated by the idea of ethnic cleansing, whether it is done by the Israeli state or by the settlers. So it ended that sort of a soft corner which had gradually emerged within not only ruling quarters, but I would say some constituencies within the Gulf. And now only some clowns are left there to parrot Israeli views or to parrot these narratives. There are two other points which I'll quickly raise, and then I'll conclude my my discussion. And these points are the impact on regional security and regime survival. And for Arab regimes, these 2 points are really important. Regional security, of course, these developments have emboldened the Iranian, or have put into play different Iranian assets or the axis of resistance. In particularly, the spotlight on the Houthis and their entry first time into this fray is of great importance from a regional security perspective of the Gulf, because if the Houthis are going to attack Israel, then their arsenal will be moving, will be using the airspace, or will be moving over Saudi Arabia. And the other possible targets, or Israeli targets, can be the Israeli citizens or High Commission in UAE. So if I am sitting in UAE and I want to do this climate summit, and I want to attract more investment, and if I am in Saudi, I want to develop NEOM, this and this, my idea is of regional stability and calm and de-escalation, it's gone. This is one thing. And the second thing is regime survival or regime security. And I must say that since the public mood has completely changed after these events, a lot of these Arab rulers, they must be remembering, or they must in the back of their head, getting visions of the military parade in which Egyptian President Anwar Sadat was killed. And that was a direct consequence of the Egyptian normalization with Israel. So the black box of the Arab Gulf state has really opened up on this particular occasion. and we don't really see we don't really have an idea what's coming ahead. But I think one thing is very certain: the idea of Palestinian cause being just a fait accompli, and the idea of no need to have a two-state solution, just to keep the status quo as it is, it's gone. You cannot have a status quo, and this is said to me by people on both sides of you can say of the political aisle. The status quo cannot continue. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Very interesting points made regarding the impact on regional security and regime survival, and some good observations on Oslo Accords as well, that they stopped short of acknowledging the Palestinian state, although there was an understanding that there has to be a coexistence side by side, but they stopped short of acknowledging. Next up, we have, unfortunately, Mr. Tariq Ali couldn't join us. He initially committed, but I think he must be busy with some other engagement, so that's why he couldn't join. So now we have Madam Sadia Taslim joining us from Canada. She is pursuing her PhD from University of British Columbia, and she is also a faculty member at the Defense and Strategic Studies Department at the Quaid-e-Azam University, Islamabad. She'll give a closing statement on moving forward a conscientious approach as Pakistanis regarding Palestine. Over to you, madam.
Thank you so much, Talha, and CSCR for hosting such an important conversation, and also for inviting me to speak on an issue that is very, very close to my heart. I'll start with a brief acknowledgement, brief land acknowledgement. I'm speaking to you from the unceded territories of the Musqueam people, who have owned this land for thousands of years, and who have experienced massive dispossession and displacement at the hands of settler colonizers. The long history of suffering has caused deep intergenerational trauma within the indigenous communities. At the same time, these experiences have helped many of them understand the plight of the people in Palestine. I have witnessed an outpouring of support and solidarity of the indigenous communities with the struggle for a free Palestine. And that is extremely heartwarming. That also, and at this point, I also want to express my own solidarity with the people in Palestine, with Dr. Nader al-Turk. I have made lots and lots of Palestinian friends. I often joke around. I say like somehow the only people that I have befriended in Vancouver are all Palestinians. But that is also because of a lot of like shared sentiments and shared interests on issues that matter to me and to my Palestinian colleagues and friends here. I would also like to mention that there will be some overlaps in what I'll say with what Professor Mukesh has already said. And when he was speaking, I was reminded of a quote that I read from Arundhati Roy when she was writing about the nuclear tests and the sort of the end of imagination around the discourses. She said there can be nothing more humiliating for a writer of fiction to have to do than restate a case that has already been made, and yet I'll do it. And just because this case is so important, and I think I'll also sort of try to follow her footsteps in that regard. So now moving to the issue of the question of solidarity with the Palestinian people, or as the title suggests, what is the way forward for us as conscientious Pakistanis? Let me open my statement with a spoiler alert, or maybe a disclaimer, so to speak. I have no hopes in states and statesmen or stateswomen. And I am not empathetic to statist narratives that speak the language of national interest and legitimize violence in the name of national security and self-defense. These are, to me, discursive weapons that are meant to sustain structures of oppression, and I defy them. I think about the way forward for consensus Pakistan as someone whose heart bleeds at the denial of justice, as a denial of right to exist, and the right to exist with dignity, irrespective of borders, nationalities, ethnicities, religions, etc. So for anyone with such sensibilities, I think this is an extremely distressing, disturbing time. The images, videos, and news that are coming from Gaza and West Bank have left many of us paralyzed in many ways. The response of the statespersons in the West and in general, and the Muslim majority states, including Pakistan, is again very, very disturbing. The fact that we in Pakistan are living under an unrepresentative government doesn't help at all. Many Pakistanis are experiencing a sense of helplessness, disarray, and confusion. What should we do? What can we do? How can we help? Will popular mobilization and protests matter? Under the restrictions on the right to assembly, what is doable and what is not are the questions that we are confronted with on a daily basis, and questions that I keep receiving. If we look at the social media landscape, it is pretty obvious that a lot of people have taken to social media to express their pain and rage, and to amplify the voices coming from Gaza and the West Bank. The disappointment over the continuation of violence pushes us towards self-doubt and skepticism over the effectiveness of our engagement on social media, and sometimes that skepticism is rightly placed. However, it is at this point that we need to pause and reflect on why we are doing what we are doing. What does the struggle of the Palestinian people mean, and why does it matter to us? What do we want to do for them, and what the people in Palestine want from us? I think these are extremely important questions, particularly at a time when a lot of emotion is being expressed. However, there is a lot of space still for thoughtful, meaningful, informed conversations. And if we have thought through these questions, the way forward, I think, is possible to contemplate. There are both near-term and long-term actions that I suggest we need to pursue. Granted that social media activism, if becomes merely a vehicle to channelize emotions, can be counterproductive. There is also a real risk of losing focus from the core issues and getting sucked into polemics. Studies on social media activism are bringing attention to a lot of these challenges, and yet in the contemporary situation, we cannot deny the fact that social media activism has become very, very important. It is important not only as a form of communication, but also as a medium for information dissemination, and in some ways like alternative medium to the mainstream media outlets. In the midst of this current excessive genocidal violence, social media is one tool that we can use to make the calls for immediate ceasefire loud and clear. More importantly, however, using social media to participate in the global conversation on Palestine is or can be useful to express our solidarity with the Palestinians. This is significant both to assure the Palestinian people of our support, but even more importantly, the detractors in the West, in Israel, and the governments in the Muslim states, that the Palestinians will never be abandoned by those who believe in justice. This is also important for the post-ceasefire time, particularly in the context of the discussions on normalization of ties with Israel in in places like Saudi Arabia and Pakistan. Social media has also become an effective space, at least for the time being, to challenge the mainstream status quo narratives and shatter the myths that are perpetuated by those who have control over the mainstream media. Yet it is also important to remind ourselves that dependency on digital platforms has its limits. We need to be mindful of the fact that the communication blackout in Gaza is a real possibility. Once the images and videos stop pouring in on our newsfeed, how will we respond? Will we start pretending that all is well and carry on with our lives as usual? This is a serious concern that we need to be wary of, because the cycles of escalation and violence against the Palestinian people are repeated every now and then, every few months or every few years. Each time it gets worse. Each time we feel enraged, glued to our screens for a while, perplexed, anxious, distressed, frantically scrolling and sharing content. And yet, after a while, once the escalation diffuses, even though the systemic oppression continues, but because the images stop circulating, we go on with life as usual, forgetting that things in Palestine turn from bad to worse. So alerting ourselves to such possibilities mean engaging with multiple sources of information. I'll say more about means to sustain our engagement with the struggle in a minute, but for the short-term actions, I would say the second important point is regarding the protests and assemblies. Even if we do not have a representative government and the chances of people's aspiration influencing political action on the part of the government are minimal, it can still be very important in helping us build solidarity networks and people's movements from the grassroots. In a similar vein, I think organizing teach-ins, both in person and online, can be useful in the context of educating people and promoting an informed discourse. Someone mentioned, I think Professor Kapila mentioned that the Palestinians assume that people already know a lot of their history, but most people do not know. I think I completely concur with that. As a Pakistani who grew up in a household where praying for Palestine was a part of the day-to-day ritual, I only realized when I came to Vancouver and met Palestinians that I had no clue of how the life under occupation was. I knew the political history of occupation, but I didn't know the lived experience of people under occupation. I think we are not sufficiently informed. I think we do not have those kinds of conversations in our schools and colleges and university campuses, not even in the Muslim world, let alone, at least not in Pakistan, let alone the Western world. So I think it's extremely important to have those kinds of conversations. And I think I would like to also commend CSCR and the entire team of CSCR for initiating this conversation and articulating it in the framework of settler colonialism and the issues of international justice. I think this can also help us in terms of educating ourselves in how to deal with tropes like equating Zionism with anti-Semitism, which are often used to silence critics. And I think this can only be done once we are fully aware of the history of both Zionism and of anti-Semitism. In-person teach-ins are also important in building an active and interactive community of like-minded concerned people who can stay engaged in these conversations even when the crisis apparently diffuses, just because the long-term struggle continues. Third, in the short term and also in the long term, I think boycotting non-essential consumer goods that come from industries that support the war machinery in Israel, whether those industries are in the United States or Europe or elsewhere, is important. I can't emphasize enough the significance of such boycotts in a neoliberal economic order. I think there is some debate in some circles on how much of it is practically possible. I think there are ways to talk about it and think about it and plan around it. But many studies have shown that economic boycotts do influence public opinion and also put pressure on the governments. Now, coming to the long-term actions, I think first of all, it's extremely important to work on these causes and struggles in a very sustained manner. Working just for or feeling enraged in a moment and then temporarily talking about it and then just forgetting about it doesn't really help anybody except for helping us vent out our emotions, and that is not useful to anyone. I think if we have not any lesson from the past episodes of escalation in violence, we must realize that this engagement, both intellectually and politically, is a very costly thing. One way of, at least when I think specifically about the Pakistani context, in terms of having sustained engagement, is to develop mechanisms for active interaction with the situation on ground. And I think one way to do that is to open up spaces and scholarships for Palestinian students in Pakistani colleges and universities, in professional colleges, medical colleges, engineering colleges, but also at places like Ayesha University that are more sort of highest institutions of highest learning. I think that helps the human face of a conflict. I think helps understand things from a very different perspective, and it does kind of help create communities that are more persistent in pursuing causes that matter to us. Secondly, I think we must not forget one core lesson that most of us were taught when we were at school and also as kids at our home. Charity begins, and when I say charity begins at home, I would want to extend that to the idea of social justice begins at home, and the struggle for human rights begins at home. And I think from a purely Pakistani context, I think it's very important for us to undertake work for justice in our own backyard. I think something that Professor Kapila also mentioned, whether it's in Balochistan or erstwhile Fata, or it's the plight of the Afghan refugees currently facing issues like deportation, or Indian-occupied Kashmir. I think we won't be able to do much for the liberation of the people of Palestine if we do not really acknowledge these injustices around us, build our capacity to deal with, to raise questions about them, to deal with them, and then understanding how injustices manifest themselves and what do they do to people. I think we can create much more formidable networks of solidarity that can be much more effective in building social movements. But this also means that we need to educate ourselves and each other, both in discourses on colonization and oppression, as well as discourses on resistance, justice, and human rights. And this is an entire sort of vast subject that we can discuss at some other occasion. Building repositories of resources, both digital and otherwise, that can help us uncover the ideational, structural, material, social and material structures that sustain oppression, will also enable us to connect all struggles for justice and fundamental rights in a rather organic manner. I think we can't at this point go and physically sort of participate in the struggle in Gaza, but we can definitely fight for Gaza and all the oppressed people in the world, regardless of where we are situated, through whatever intellectual efforts we can do, whatever in whatever ways of solidarity, in whatever forms we can express our solidarity, be it through poetry or writing or art or culture or trauma, and sort of inviting the rest of the world through their embassies and consulates to witness that and understand and realize the plight of the people who are suffering. I would just close with saying that I don't know if we can actually make a difference by doing all of this, but I do very strongly believe that it is worth trying. And I think at the end, if we make these efforts, we'll go down the history with the satisfaction that we stood for what was just and what was right, and that itself is a goal worth struggling for. Thank you.
Thank you so much, madam. Some observations that I would like to sort of aggregate and put in front of the audience. What you have said, you have given from two point of views, solidarity in short term and solidarity in long term, and very relevant points related to social media activism, protestations in assemblies, teach-ins, boycotting, etc., etc. And in long term, as Pakistanis, you have a very pertinent suggestion that we need to open up spaces in scholarship for Palestinian students in Pakistan. So now we'll be moving to the Q&A session. We'll be starting off from the very first question by Mr. Zaki Khaled, who is an intelligence analyst and consultant. In this question, I feel it's very relevant for Mr. Umer Karim and the Deputy Head of Mission, the Palestinian Embassy, Dr. Nader Turk, if he wants to address it. So the question is, has the Palestinian government considered seeking support of Abraham Accords partner countries such as UAE and Bahrain to open a channel for talks with Israel? Maybe Mr. Umer Karim can take this question, and if Dr. Nader Al-Turk wants to comment on it, perhaps Dr. Nader Al-Turk, since you have unmuted your mic, maybe you can address this question first.
Okay. First, thanks a lot for all the speakers, honorable speakers, for their solidarity, for their support, for raising their voice in favor of Palestine. For this question, our leadership try to do the best things they can do, all the power between their hands, to be sure the bleeding of our people in Gaza ends soon, to be sure that's going to be survived. Our leader, in connection with all the countries, brotherly countries, and all the friendly countries around the world, to be sure, keep Americans, Israelis, British under pressure to make them obey the international law, obey the human rights principles, the Israeli crimes, war crimes, and crimes against humanity. Especially Qatar, Turkey, Egypt, Jordan are involved in very strong way to cooperate with our leadership to reach to something here. But still, what we heard from the Americans yesterday, Mr. Blinken mentioned that ceasefire is not going to be soon, I think, according to Israeli request. Israeli leadership mentioned yesterday very clearly, very strongly, that there is not going to be any ceasefire, because ceasefire means that the Israelis failed in this war. They lost the war. They didn't achieve, because until now, they didn't achieve any of their goals, which was market these crimes by it. So this is the situation. This is how our leadership dealing with the issue. Our goal, which we are trying to achieve right now, is end these crimes, save the precious life of our people, and getting opportunity for better future for the next generation. This is what we are working now of it as our leadership. Excuse me, I have something at 2 o'clock. Okay, I need to leave about 2 o'clock. So if you don't mind and you give me the opportunity, you and your honorable speaker, I'd just like to highlight few points. Is that okay?
Sure, sure. We have another speaker who has to leave at 2 p.m. So you can share the points that you want to, then I'll direct my question
Okay.
at her.
I thank Sister Ayesha Malik for what she spoke about international law, international humanitarian law. And I like to share something I received by social media from one of the Lebanese professor in law and international law mentioned, I apologize for my student in Lebanese university because I was radical in teaching international law, international humanitarian law, and United Nations. After the Zionist criminal in Gaza, there is no need anymore to teach such subject like this, because it is clear that power is the Lord of the world. If this is, I end what he mentioned in the social media, if this belief become popular among the humanity, among the nations, that mean each nation, each group, each person, he will looking for getting more and more power by getting more and more weapon to use it not only to defend himself, but even to achieve what he is looking for by killing more, injuring more people, to be sure that the only way to get what he is need is violence. And we hope so. This is not going to be happen, because who knows to where it's going to be reached, looking for, seeking for power. It's going to be chemical weapons, can be biological weapons, it can be nuclear weapons. If this become between the hands of many nations, many peoples, many groups, that means the humans being going to be end of this planet. This is the first thing. Second, my sister Ayesha mentioned about, again, about the international law. We have from United Nations General Assembly more than 800 resolutions in favor of Palestine. We have more than 85 resolutions from Security Council in favor of Palestine, but Israelis, none. Israelis deal as they are above of the law, above of the international community, because they are supported by Americans' weapons, Americans' aid, British aid, British weapon, and they are supporting and become stronger by the American veto. And to explain this point more, Israelis, when they join United Nations as a member, they are one of very few countries in the world joining the membership, full membership of United Nations according to two conditions. Obey 181 resolution, which speak about two states on the land of Palestine, which I speak about it before, was giving the Israelis 56% of the land of Palestine. Actually, they are controlled 100% of the land of Palestine right now, and Julan from Syria extra, Mazar Shab'a from Lebanon extra. So they need to obey this resolution 181, and the other resolution need to obey and facilitate to be in progress, to be aware on the ground, both of it. 194, which is the right of return of Palestinian refugees. According to that, if they are not obey this, why they are still member in United Nations? When you are joining a club, joining institute, you need to follow the procedures, the laws, the principles of that institute, of that club, to join your membership and to continue. When you break it, you lose your membership. How become Israel is still membership have a of United Nations when they are all even, they didn't obey the conditions which according to it become a member of the United Nations. For peace process, Prime Minister of Israel, Yitzhak Shamir, in 1991, when they are joining Madrid international, he mentioned that he will negotiate with the Palestinians for 20 years without giving them nothing. We are negotiating since 32 years and we get nothing. So according to that, the flood of political horizon will keep making us going from circle of blood to other circle of blood. As long as the United Nations don't have the power to make other countries, other nations obey its resolution and international law, we will reach to nothing. We will never get peace and stability anywhere in the world. This is something else. I thank Sister Sadia Taslim for his speak about scholarships. Pakistan very generous with us. We get more than 50,000 Palestinian during the last years in their study, finish their study from Pakistani universities, from Sindh, Punjab, and others areas of Pakistan. And most of them was doctors and engineers, as she mentioned. But we need actually more scholarship, because you see what we are facing in Gaza. Our hospitals, 70% right now out of service. Our staff there, they are working 24 hours a day for the last, since 7 of the months until now, to take care of our patients, our injured people, and they are not enough. They even start getting the retired doctors, the retired nurses to come back to join them and help them in their work. And this is not enough, because we speak about a huge number of victims by the Israeli criminals. Other things we are needed indeed for getting more scholarship in different subjects. Our battle is not only to build our institute by engineers and doctors. We need our battle. We have in diplomacy, media, in social media. So we need more diplomat, more politics, more law people study international law. More people can deal with the media and social media, and more technical in IT, which is because our battle, it is in all the fields to become free, to get for battle over freedom and independence. We need all this subject to be a bear in favor of Palestine and incorporate together to get more and more, inshallah, scholarship. Pakistan is generous, and I'm sure they will work hard to do that, inshallah, and facilitate it for our Palestinian students. Thank you again for your time. Thank you again for your support. I appreciate your hard work in favor of Palestine, which is really matter, and giving a strong message in face of double standards, and give us power to continue our battle for freedom and independence, because we are sure we have a lot of lovers of Palestine behind us, following the principle of Qa'id A'zam, the vision of Qa'id A'zam, and believe that one day soon, inshallah, we will have the opportunity to pray together in Aqsa Masjid. Pakistan Zindabad, Palestine Zindabad.
Thank you so much, Dr. Nader. So now we have a quick question that Ms. Ayesha Malik will address before leaving. Just one question, and that is directed at her by by Dr. Tausif Javed. He has talked about how international law is relevant. The principle of the law of proportionality, in the way, how is it applicable? and can it be
Yeah.
utilized? I think you have read the question. Please go ahead.
Yeah, so I've read both of the questions. I think one was from Fariha and then one is from Dr. Tosif. So I will reply to that. I'm afraid I am going to have to be that very annoying international lawyer that is constantly defending the role of international law in this. And partly it's because it's my job, but also because I really do believe that the law offers us the language with which we can resist this and the language with which we can criticize Israel in a way that people can understand. Even Fariha, your question was about IHL violations. And I would say that the Geneva Conventions, additional protocols are so broad that a lot of things are IHL violations. Not giving a prisoner of war his tobacco ration is an IHL violation. It doesn't rise to the level of it being a war crime, which is a grave breach of the Geneva Conventions. And what Israel is conducting are manifestly war crimes. Starvation as a method of warfare, collective punishment, the demographic change of Palestine in the sense of transferring its civilians, those are grave breaches of the Geneva Conventions. Those count as war crimes. So in terms of what are the consequences for those war crimes? An issue with international law, of course, is the lack of enforcement mechanisms. And largely, and I think this goes into Dr. Dosif's question about powerful states. Well, the thing is that when there is a will, there is a way, in the sense of we have seen the opposite happen in Russia and Ukraine. We see the Israelis now the UN ambassador for Israel went to the UN wearing the Star of David, trying to allege that a genocide is being conducted against the Israelis, which for me just baffles my mind when the genocidal rhetoric has been so stark from the Israeli side against the Palestinians. And so really the language of resistance is what we're looking for, and international law does provide us with that. It does tell you that the Palestinians have the right to resist, they have the right to self-defense. Israel doesn't, because it's in an occupation, it's trying to annex that territory. So in terms of going to international law for relief, one of the things that really does motivate me, especially when it comes to the advisory opinion of 2024 and the fact that we've already had the advisory opinion of 2004, was that we had the South Africa advisory opinion on the Namibia question in 1971 before the International Court of Justice. Of course, even then, it took 2 decades before we could end the apartheid regime. And that was also because you had powerful states like the US and the UK. You had Maggie Thatcher and you had Ronald Reagan vetoing any calls for action to be taken against South Africa. Similarly, you have the same with Biden relating to the ceasefire. He's now calling for a pause in fighting, which I find to be outrageous, because last week you voted against a ceasefire. So I take comfort in the fact that the moral arc of the universe is long, but it does bend towards justice at the end. What we saw in South Africa when it came to the 1971 advisory opinion, that gives a strong moral and legal victory that the international community can rely on. And now, even beyond that, we're looking at an era post-decolonization. And the sad fact of a lack of capacity in the global south means that we're not contributing as much to international law as we should. International law is simply what states say it is. And the fact is that we really need to rally around and address this advisory opinion. Of course, the enforcement mechanisms have been an issue. This is a very rare case of ICC jurisdiction. So for me, that is an incredibly important fact. And that is something that I would hope that we can see something finally being done on this issue in the international law sphere. Many apologies, I do have to leave, but thank you so much for everyone's reflections. They were very, very interesting and engaging for everyone.
Thank you for joining us, Ms. Ayesha Malik. It was good to hear you talk. Okay, so now I will be directing one question each at Dr. Mukesh, Madam Sadia, and Mr. Umer Karim. Ms. Mariam Rashid posed 2 questions. I'll take the question that she has directed towards Mr. Umer Karim. It is, can we consider the Arab restraint as an attempt to refrain from falling into bloc-level military confrontations within the region, particularly after Yemen's entry into the conflict? How are countries like Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, UAE, and Egypt, Jordan expected to respond? This one question is directed towards Mr. Umer Karim. But before he answers, I am directing one question that is directed by Mr. Shazib Usman from he's a research associate of international law at Islamabad Policy Research Institute. His question is that do you think that the Gaza crisis, and this question has been addressed to both Dr. Mukesh and Madam Sadia, do you think the Gaza crisis has the ability and the capacity to damage irretrievably the goodwill of Western prestige economy among Muslim youth, or on a larger level, the youth of global South? So maybe Mr. Umar Karim can give his reflections on the question that was posed, then followed by either Dr. Mukesh or Madam Sadia.
Okay, so I can quickly answer it. I don't think so that there is any sort of the Arab world has any inclination in terms of confronting Israel. Only yesterday we saw Jordan called back its ambassador from Israel. So if they do this, this is in itself quite a lot. I don't think so that yeah, no, there is no bloc and there is no military confrontation certainly against Israel, and all the mentioned countries, Saudi Arabia, UAE, Egypt, Jordan, they want this to de-escalate as soon as possible, because the more this goes on, the more this creates problems regarding regime security. So yeah.
All right. Thank you so much. Dr. Mukesh, perhaps you would like to answer the question that was directed to you.
If I get the question right, it's whether the West's hypocrisy and double standards is affecting the attitudes of global South youth, including Muslim youth as well. Well, I think it will raise questions, and it's a good idea if the youth of today, wherever they might be, are not simply accepting what is handed down in terms of principles or theories, and think for themselves. That, of course, is a good thing, whether it's North or South. But whether or not this means that the youth of the global South are going to kind of turn away, I am more doubtful. I don't think so. You know, if you actually look at the cultural reality of the world, the Western culture, including the political culture and economic culture and social culture, is dominant. And you see this, for example, with the movement of refugees and so on. Everybody wants to come to Europe or to the North America to become as a migrant. Nobody wants to go to China, for example, or Russia, for example. So I think there is frustration with the double standards in the West, but ultimately the values of the West, the original values of the West, are the values that I think are necessary to create a world that is fit for all. So I think youth in the global South may feel disappointed, they may feel frustrated, some of them will be rebellious, some of them will even join jihadi movements and become terrorists, perhaps, sadly. But I think in the long run, I see no alternative to the world but to adopt the neoliberal freedoms that are fundamentally, we consider them Western, because they're opposed to totalitarian cultures that have grown up everywhere, including the Middle East and including the Far East. But ultimately, these are United Nations values. So when we talk about the West, we are fundamentally talking about the values that are in the United Nations Charter and all the big instruments that govern decent relations in the world. The fact that the West is not following them isn't an argument that they are wrong, or that therefore the whole of Western culture has gone down the drain and can be kind of left aside. And I think the youth in the global South actually see their future in the Western approach rather than any other approach. So I actually think there is a hypocrisy on the side of the global South as well, as much as there is hypocrisy on the side of the global North.
Thank you so much. Perhaps, ma'am.
Yeah, I'll just add one point to it. I'll not comment on how things are in global South right now. I think I would just say something about how I am seeing the situation evolving in the global North, in North America. And here, I think within two groups, at least, there is going to be an increasing divide and a growing despondency with regard to the Western values and the Western discourses. One is within the youths, within the North American youth itself. I think a lot of young people are growing increasingly disappointed with the divide in the media coverage, mainstream media coverage, and what they are getting on social media and learning through their friends who are coming from the Middle East and things like that. And it's very difficult for them to absorb the fact that their states are sort of clamping down on expression of certain kind of opinions and things like that. And that's there is a kind of a cognitive dissonance that they are experiencing, and it's hard for them to believe that the ideas that they have grown up with are not really being lived up to. That shift, at least this is how I'm seeing it. The other shift is, or at least there is a divide within the Muslim youth in the West. People who grew up here, particularly second, third generation Muslims, who their parents came with a lot of expectations, the kind of expectations that Professor Kapila was mentioning still exist pretty much in a big part of the global South when it comes to life in the US and Europe. But these are people who have a very different sense of identity and claim and ownership of the West. And then they think that their states and their leaders are not they are not expressing the same kind of ownership for them as citizens of the state. And I think there is that kind of a feeling of alienation is creating some kind of disappointment in the larger Western project and its discourses, and that I think is going to increase.
Tala, if I can just add here one sentence, that we come from global South as political refugees, and here in the world of an Indian British friend, we become politically homeless here. So this is what's going on.
Thank you so much. We had a good session, and I'm sure that all the participants, all the listeners, this video has been, the webinar has been recorded. The video will go online on YouTube. I'm sure whoever will listen to the conversations that were done, the comments that were made, their vision will get broadened. Regrettably, we were supposed to have one speaker on who would have talked about the media framing related to Israel-Palestine conflict, and another eminent speaker who had to talk about the colonial aspect of the Palestine issue. They were supposed to join us, but unfortunately they couldn't. Otherwise, we would have really benefited from their experiences and from their understanding as well. So we, as a center, we share the pain of Palestinians. The initial idea behind this webinar was that we felt that the colonial aspect of the Palestinian issue, it is being challenged in the Western academia. There are certain articles, very famous article written by a very famous historian, posted in the Atlantic. I was looking at some comments that were made by the former Dean of SAIS, School of Advanced International Studies, Johns Hopkins. And they also challenged the Israeli-Palestinian conflict being seen from the decolonial lens. So I feel that the discourse on how Palestine has been colonized systematically over the last 100 years, there is this rebuttal, there is certain disagreement that is being done to discredit that. I'm thankful to the speakers. Dr. Nader Turk and Ms. Ayesha Malik has left. I'm thankful to you, Dr. Mukesh Kapila, Ms. Sadia Tasleem, and Mr. Umer Karim for taking out your valuable time. We hope to host you again in some other webinar related to your expertise, in some other guest lecture perhaps related to your expertise. This webinar is concluded now. Thank you.